Good afternoon, everyone. Fantastic to see you all getting through the virtual door of this webinar, and I see we've got over 100 people in the room already. So that's good to know. It'll be quite interesting to hear from you in the chat who you are and if you've returned to the workplace yourself today or if you're still working from home. We've got a very pertinent and important topic, I think, coming up for today. How do you equip your people for the realities of COVID-19, especially after level 1 has just been announced in South Africa, obviously starting on the 1st of October. COVID-19 is not going to go anywhere soon, so how are you going to deal with it? Are people still working from home? Have you got a plan in place? We're very fortunate that this webinar is sponsored by Workday. Workday has been a supporter of the CHRO community and the HR Indaba for years now, and we're really grateful for that. And we'll hear from two fantastic. We've got Richard here from Workday, by the way, the Senior Director of Product Marketing EMEA at Workday, and he told me he likes HR people better than finance people, so we're in good hands. And we've also got two phenomenal HR leaders. Mechell Chetty will be joining just now. She's rushing out of a meeting to be joining us, but lots of you know her. She was nominated for the CHRO Awards last year, the HR Vice President at Unilever. And then who you can see at the top, obviously, as well, is Rachel Masuku of our own Webber Wentzel here in Johannesburg, and we're very fortunate to have her as well. Webber Wentzel is just by the way, a local customer of Workday, and Unilever is one of the big multinationals that also works at Workday, so that's good to know. But we're not really going to talk about that really. We're really going to talk about return to the workplace, and hopefully we'll all learn something from each other today. So I'm going to hand over to Richard for now. I'm going to take these slides down and put the other slides up, and then Rachel and I will come off camera. Richard will do the introduction, and then we're going to have a fantastic conversation. And by that time, Mechell will also have been able to join us. I'm also going to put a poll in the chat just now, so there's something for you to click while Richard is talking. We're quite curious to hear from you about your stance on working from home versus working in the office. But read the question and please let us know where you stand. Over to you, Richard.
Lovely, thank you, Joel. Good afternoon, everyone, and it's great to be here. In previous years, I've come out to South Africa, 2 or 3 times a year. I've always loved my visits, and hopefully, we can start that again next year. But it's good to be virtually here. So just in the next 10 minutes or so, I wanted to set the stage and give you some perspectives on the journey back to the office for many organizations, and suggest that there are 4 main stages to that journey, if you like, and talk about those different stages and what you might want to think about as you build your plan to return to the workplace. So that's me. So I've been with Workday for 5.5 years, and I'm very much a HR technologist. So in terms of how can we use technology within HR to become more strategic, provide a better service to the business, and so on for the last roughly 20 years. So as part of this presentation, what I want to share with you is also some perspectives from Workday. So Workday is a relatively large organization with, I think, roughly 12,500 employees spread across 90 different office locations around the world. And back in early March, Workday, before any lockdown had been announced that I'm aware of, decided that the entire workforce would work from home. Flicked a switch. We were all told, you're going to work from home until for the foreseeable future, and the business was able to pivot. And we now have moved from these working in an office, collaborating, meetings face to face, to like most of us on the call here, working virtually from home. And we have these 90 office locations. Currently, we have I think it's 6 at the last count, are partially open in locations like Paris, Amsterdam, Dublin, Seoul, Hong Kong, and somewhere else that I've forgotten. Our South African office is currently closed. And the latest is that we no one in Workday will be expected, unless they're happy to and their office is open, to go back to their office until August next year at the earliest. So that's where we are today. Now, that's Workday's headquarters in. I'm based in London, by the way. I should have said that. Workday's headquarters is in Pleasanton, in California, quite close to San Francisco, maybe half an hour outside of San Francisco. And there you can see our campus and the big building at the back there with all the glass windows. Well, they're all going to be glass. That's a bit of a silly thing to say. The modern building at the back there was only opened, I think, about 2 years ago. So we've got that real estate sitting there, maybe $1 billion worth of real estate. I don't know, significant amount of assets sitting there, and they've been empty for the last 6 months. And the question is, I'm going to share some data with you in a minute, but to an extent, lots of employees are happy to be working from home. And our organizations could, potentially save money, real estate costs, by downsizing these physical assets. But if we do that, what will happen to innovation? Innovation, can we do that virtually, or do we require, we're a technology company, we have collaboration spaces for our developers to work together, to be creative, to come up with new ideas. Can we do that virtually? Big question. How do employees create connections virtually? Are people becoming lonely, and what impact is that having on their well-being if they're not going into an office? So these are, I'm sure, are all questions that you've been asking yourselves and your organizations. Now, here are some stats, and these stats come from Josh Berzin, from McKinsey, but also from Workday, from our own surveys. So what we do at Workday is every Friday, we call it Feedback Friday, and a survey sent out from Workday, the solution, asking 3 questions to every single employee. Now, before the pandemic, that survey was focused on the employee experience. We wanted to make sure that our employees are having a positive experience, and if they weren't, we wanted to identify that early. However, when the pandemic hit, we pivoted and changed the focus of those surveys to really move on to trying to understand and take the pulse, if you like, of employee well-being. How productive did they feel they were working from home? And did they still have a sense of belonging to Workday? Did they still feel that culture? And, we've got more than 2 million data points now that we're able to analyze with our people analytics team. And the 17% there that you see, so it's saying 17% of employees, they're only, really, because it's quite low, 17% of Workday's employees around the world who want to return to work full-time. And that clearly will have big implications on Workday's particular journey in terms of how we take our employees back to the office. And, there's a lot of discussion around probably some kind of hybrid working model is going to emerge from this crisis, where we're much more flexible working, sometimes in the office, sometimes at home, perhaps go into the office more for when we need to collaborate. The other interesting thing from the, I think, and the productivity and the engagement stats come from Josh Berzin, and his research is, they're actually bizarrely, it's kind of the opposite of what you would have thought, but employee engagement has gone up while people have been working from home. And also, 41% of employees say that they're actually more productive. So the question for you is, do you know how many of your employees want to return full-time to the office, or would rather remain at home? So these are questions.
Richard, maybe this is a good time to maybe present the poll results. We were asking, do you personally want to work from the office during at the moment, or during and after level 1? And I'm ending the poll now. And what people said was 0% said I prefer working from the office.
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
4% said returning to the office is mandatory in my organization. 18% said never again, I'm much more productive at home, and 77%, so I would say everyone, says a combination of working from home and the office would be ideal.
So it's that hybrid model that I was just talking about there, and that reflects.
Yeah, that's why I thought let me quickly chuck it in there. So we've got we're in a good company here.
I'm not talking rubbish. That's good. That's good. Okay. Thank you, Joel. So let me just go back to my slides. There we go. Okay. So in terms of Workday and our people and purpose team, that's what we call HR. It's called people and purpose. As they have been plotting and coping with this crisis and thinking about, okay, what's our journey going to look like going back to the office? There's 4 guiding principles for the team. First of all, from a Workday's perspective, we don't want to be the first company to be back in the office. We rather lag a little bit and look at what other companies are doing and learn from them. If you're in an industry where, frankly, you need to be the first, then I think look outside of your industry, see what others are doing, learn from them. We are empowering local decision making. We've got 90 different office locations, and you know what? We'll probably have 90 different plans to get people back into the office, because as you move from location to location, some offices require everyone has to commute by public transport to get to that office. That's the case with my office in London. You cannot drive there. It's in central London. It costs a fortune. There's nowhere to park. So that office is likely to open later, I would suggest, than other offices we have where people can drive in. So they're less, less human contact. So all these sorts of things need to be taken into consideration. So you need localized plans, flexibility. Our team have been making plans in the morning. The world has changed, and they've had to completely scrap that plan and restart. So you need to be flexible. You need to move into this continuous planning mode. And then finally, and this is a general guiding principle within Workday outside of this return to work, is about being transparent in your communications to the workforce. Don't leave them sitting there wondering what's going on. Be clear and transparent in your communications. One of the key things that we've learned, and this may appear to be obvious, but is that this whole managing this return to the workplace, it requires a cross-functional team. It takes a village. It takes lots of people. You need lots of people on board. You need your executive stakeholders, HR clearly, workplace safety, procurement, for getting PPE equipment if you need it, for hand sanitizer. So it takes a lot of different stakeholders. It's a team sport, and also you need that local representation that we talked about for every single location where you have an office. No one plan will fit all. So let's look at these 4 stages that I talked about. I need to hurry up a bit. I will do, Joel. So the first phase is around this evaluation. And if I go back to our Feedback Fridays, we've been measuring how productive do people feel, what's their well-being, both physical and mental health. Do they still feel that sense of belonging? And that data is analysed frequently within Workday just to understand what's happening with the workforce, and we push that data to point of action rapidly, i.e. the people who make the decisions get that data rapidly. For instance, we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was the data from these pulse surveys, that we had 33 teams in 11 different locations were really struggling with working from home, from being productive. So rather than trying to boil the ocean, we had very targeted interventions with those teams to help them with that transition to remote working, to help them collaborate. And it was very, very successful. So it's very, very much about understanding the different parts of the organization, how they're functioning, and intervening as appropriate. Okay, so yeah, gather that data, understand the sentiment of the workforce, and also gather the preferences of your workforce. You need to understand, do they actually want to return to the workforce yet? And some will, some won't, but it's really important that you understand that. Second phase is the planning. And, you know, there is no playbook for the situation we find ourselves in. No one really knows what the right answer is, but I think frequent planning, frequent scenario planning, we're going to do this if this happens, is essential. And when I say frequent, you know, that could be daily, weekly planning, because the world is changing around us. And you're going to need to pull in lots of data to be able to do that planning, your workforce data, but also external data. Things about, you know, do people have to commute into that office? How many lifts do you have in that office? Are the children back to school in that office location? Is it a COVID hotspot? And so on and so forth. So there can't be any single plan. You need to engage the stakeholders, but you need to move to this continuous planning model. Right, then when we get to the point of reopening, it's about preparing the workers to go back into that office if it has been closed for a while. And so, for instance, at Workday, we have what we call these COVID-19 journeys, whereby I know that as an employee, if I want to find out something about our response to COVID-19, I go into Workday, I click on this journey, and it guides me through the process. It points me in the direction of where all the information is that I need to be able to understand what's happening with the London office, for instance. When do we anticipate that office opening? What will be how will that office be organised, and so on and so forth. It's also about, you know, we're developing a back to office passport, as you can see the third bullet there, whereby it'll be on my mobile phone. It will show me what's the status of my office. I'll be able to go into that app and do my health attestation. So, you know, do I have any symptoms this morning? Yes, no. And obviously I can only go into the office if I say no. And then finally, we look at the, and I think this is probably actually going to be the most difficult and the most interesting one perhaps to discuss more into the future, is, you know, the world is changing rapidly. People's jobs were changing before the pandemic, but the pandemic is accelerating certain changes in terms of the types of jobs that we need people to do, the skills that they need, the way our organization is structured, moving perhaps from hierarchical to more networks of teams, more of an agile organization, and that's going to require significant reskilling of the workforce. How are you going to handle that? How are you going to help your employees through this transitional phase as their jobs change, as they need to upskill and so on? And that's a very interesting area. And how are you going to fill those skills gaps? Okay, so in summary, you know, you need to get the right team together, have local representation for each office. You need to make sure you have a clear communication plan to your employees. This is not the time to hide anything. This is the time to be completely transparent. You need to move to this continuous planning, scenario modeling mode that I just talked about. And then finally, you need to keep monitoring and understanding the sentiment of the workforce and also, you know, the health of the workforce. So yeah, it's really fundamentally all about being agile and responding to, you know, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow or the day after. It's about having that inbuilt agility in your organization to be able to cope with that. Okay, so that's the end of the sort of just setting up the discussion. If I hand back to you, Joel.
Thanks very much, Richard, and I think that was very insightful. So thanks for running us through that. We have Mechell on the line, I think, by now. So Mechell and Rachel, let's see if we can jump on camera and test if our mute buttons work. There you are. How are you doing, Mechell? I think you're still on mute. It's the button next to the camera.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Fantastic. Can hear you perfectly and clear. And Rachel, just checking if you're also off mute. Let's just do the full off mute check.
Hi, Joel.
Fantastic. Yeah, and once again, thanks for being here, Mechell. I've obviously introduced you as the person you are, and we're very grateful for having you on the webinar. And I know you've sort of picked up half of the last bit of Richard's presentation. And I think sort of from some of the stats you were sharing, and that's actually what I wanted to ask the first question about. I think Richard was saying only 17% of employees want to return full-time. And we saw in our own poll as well, 77% are hoping for a hybrid model for themselves. And 41% in Richard's stats say they were actually more productive. And what I found shocking just now in our own poll is that 0% prefer to go back to the office, which is just quite remarkable if you think how we were thinking about these things just a year ago. So the question maybe for Rachel and Mechell, and maybe Rachel, you want to go first. What do your employees want? So you obviously work with a lot of lawyers and people around in that space. And how have you been approaching the return to the workplace so far at Webber Wentzel?
Okay, so I think it was interesting listening to Richard sharing the Webber Wentzel story, because the Workday story, because it's so similar to the approach that we've taken at Webber. So we also took a poll when we were in the hard lockdown, as we started preempting the move from level 5 to level 4. And strangely, at that point in time, about 47.4% of our employees indicated that because of the change management activities that were engaged or activated, they were quite comfortable to come back to work. And our industry is quite unique because in professional services, the collaboration, the being in the office is quite important. So we've had to make sure that we are able to activate a number of other initiatives to make sure that we're able to find that balance between remote working and working from home. And what we've done is with a strong sponsorship from EXCO and leadership, we quickly managed to transit to find that balance. And we activated or enabled remote working with a mix of working from the office by making sure that we replicated employees' offices in the home space, so that if you were to work either in the office or in the home, the experience is really the same. We allowed our employees to move their hardware between the office and the home. Also taking, like we work with multiple screens, for example. So we really wanted to make sure that our employees were quite comfortable. And what we've also done, just to make sure that our employees are ready for coming back to work, is that we've maintained regular engagement with our employees right through the different engagements. So we have regular town halls where we check in with our employees. We always follow up that with team follow-ups through the business unit heads and the HODs, and we take them along the journey in terms of all our preparations. So just high level, those are some of the things. And what we've done is, lastly, just something probably I could share, Joel, is that when we were building a prototype of our return to work plan, we decided that the COVID task team that was established, which was multidisciplinary, actually made sure that we took the feedback that we got from employees in customizing the work back to work readiness. And because of that, and because we've taken the inputs of our employees into account, the adoption and the coming back to work, even though it has been gradual, has been quite easy in terms of rolling that out and finding that balance. Like you said, Richard, there is no blueprint to this. It's all trial and error. And what we've just done is we try to stick to the guidelines that are given by the Department of Health. And then we've just ramped up as we've moved through the different levels.
Thanks a lot, Rachel. Yeah, maybe just Mechell. Obviously, at Unilever, not everyone sits at a desk. There's quite various roles within your organization. So maybe some people will. It's not always about working from home. There's different aspects to returning to the workplace as well. So how have you been dealing with it over the last couple of months, and what is your plan for the level 1 situation?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Joel. And I guess it's very similar to listening to Richard and to Rachel about their plans and what's transpired. You know, when we first did the poll, it was very much 50-50, and we saw that playing out global. as we do, we're going to go into a second poll now as we get closer to the time of how people want to work, with a little bit more detail on in terms of how they would like to go ahead and work. But I suspect what we've seen happen where we've our employees have returned to work in other countries is, although the poll showed 50-50, the actual presence in the office is even less. So even fewer people are actually coming physically to the office than what the poll was saying. So we can expect to see that happening initially. And for me, it's not necessarily an indication of what will sustain itself. I think people will find a rhythm. So if I think about prior to COVID, we were already adapting our workplace. So we were already creating, revamping our workspaces much more for agile working, much more for collaborative spaces and quiet spaces. And your actual desk, is neither here nor there. So we were starting to move to neighborhoods and say, it's not my desk, it's a desk when I want to go and get some emails done or something like that. So the idea or the notion of having a desk in a physical office space was beginning to die down anyway. And I think this will just amplify that. So even if you do go back to the office, you're going to find that you're going back much more for collaboration or really quiet spaces. And we do find that, particularly with mums who are working from home, saying actually the distraction at home is becoming difficult now. So actually they want to go to work for quiet space. So their needs are different. And I think for me, what's coming out very much is how we use our workspaces to fit the needs of multiple requirements that we need to go back. And so that's part of our design thinking. And I think the other thing is just the mindset shift and the behavior shift of, what is important when work gets done? Is it the physical space, and to what extent? Is it the technology, and to what extent? And is it just really relationship and trust? So part of what we are doing is really just continuing to build what really worked for us in terms of relationship and trust, that work is getting done. Oddly enough, we have seen productivity ramp up. We have seen communication ramp up. We have seen engagement and inclusion ramp up. So, some of those things that you typically fear when people are working from home is not necessarily fears we need to have, and we need to change our mindsets, because actually, if you have common goals and you're working towards something, you actually find that those behaviors are there. And we're trying to worry about people's wellness right now and tell them to take breaks and relax and take leave. And I can't tell you how many times I'm trying to tell people, take your leave. So, yeah.
When have you taken your last leave, Mechell?
I have, actually. I took a week off about 2.5 weeks ago now. Yeah.
Fantastic. Get me jealous. I'm actually going on leave next week just because of this. And do you think the increased productivity, just to follow up on that, and maybe Richard, you've got some insights as well, but maybe just to hear from Mechell, the increased engagement and productivity, do you think it's a sustainable thing, or do you think it's something that because we're right in the beginning of it and we're trying to get through this period?
Yeah, I think for us, we were deemed essential services from day one. Health and hygiene products, food products are quite essential. So I think the sheer demand from our consumers and our government in terms of requirements for our products caused us to have to go into, accelerated activity and productivity. We've learned a lot through this process of, how work can get done with speed. And we've broken many factory records and everything as a result of that, which we want to hold on to. But we don't want it to be that employees are burning out as a result of that. So, long working hours is something that I'm actually working on and saying, how do we make sure that people are not working excessively and that they're still finding time for their wellness. So I think that is something that we're working to say, where we've seen a peak, trying to dial people back to say, have a measured approach. There's a temptation to have a meeting now because you can just put an MS Teams invite in. So everything needs to be, so collaboration has a dark side, because then you don't want to do anything until you've spoken to someone. So we need to obviously pay attention to that as well.
Thanks, Richard. What are your observations about these ramping up in productivity? If it's a temporary thing or not?
Yeah, well, I mean, looking in my crystal ball. So,
Please.
I mean, I personally, I think it's sustainable, and I think it's sustainable because we've seen a significant acceleration in sort of digital transformation within our companies, right? And to give you an example, there's a big Swiss pharmaceutical company that had a 2-year plan to deploy Microsoft Teams as their collaboration space. The pandemic hit, and they were like, wow, we need to do, so then, we need to hurry up. So they deployed it in 2 weeks. So I think there's a mindset change that you can't hang around anymore. Agility is key, and you just need to get on with it. And I think that this proliferation of digital tools, hopefully will, there'll be a rising, the tide will rise, and people's productivity will rise with that tide. I'm always a glass half full kind of person, but I do think that will be maintained, the productivity.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I think we obviously, as people registered for this webinar, we also asked them, do you have a question for the panelist? And what comes up a lot is something that you probably can't really answer, because Richard already said there is no playbook, there is no blueprint. Because, for example, Tuli Masuku, and I don't know if she's related to Rachel, from HR Director at Surface, said, what are the main principles for going back to work? Mpo Kekana says, do you have a standard re-onboarding plan? And I've already seen similar comments and questions in the chat. Rachel, if you had to sort of pick out 2 or 3 things that have really been crucial in a positive sense for your return to work policy, could you pick out a few?
Yeah, so I think from a return to work perspective, we've made sure that we've had to customize most of our policies to adjust to quickly adjust or align to the new way of working. So one of the stories I shared in one of the CHRO sessions was that we had, as Webber just recently or last year, implemented flexible work practices. And with the advent of COVID, when we went into hard lockdown, we managed to, to ramp up the rollout of flexible work practices, and then couple that with the remote working policy. But also, I think as a firm, what we've had to look at is also other emerging requirements, such as how to ensure that our client data is secure, that the devices that our employees are using at home are secured, just making sure that our policies and procedures are able to accommodate the changing needs. The other thing that we've also had to develop quickly is also a infectious disease, because we can look at this and think just about COVID, but today it could be COVID, tomorrow it could be any other infection. So how does an organization immediately develop the ability to respond to any infectious outbreak that happens out there? What we've done is we've developed a policy that enables us to respond to any infectious disease outbreak, and in the event that we find ourselves being told that it's a state of emergency, how do we respond as a firm? So what has worked to our advantage is that the support functions that support our core business, which is legal services, have had to quickly get together, and we've collaborated like we've never collaborated before between HR, IT, general counsel, health and safety, to just make sure that we are able to actually make sure that we don't drop our productivity levels. And I echo what my counterparts are actually talking about in terms of productivity. We've seen our productivity soar through the roof during this period. Our engagement levels have actually, as lawyers, I mean, one of the things we struggle with is lawyers do emails, they don't do face-to-face contact, and for some reason, I think what we've seen as a silver lining in this is that our engagement has really improved in the last 6 months, because people are able to just talk and engage, and technology, for me, I'm happy because we've also managed to get the lawyers to stop writing notes and to finally adopt the technology and actually get them to use some of the new technologies that we've been trying to do. So we really have benefited from, we've seen the upside of the COVID pandemic.
Thanks, Rachel. And it sounds like the crisis is not being wasted at Webber Wentzel.
Yeah, no, never waste a good crisis.
There was a very question I thought from Leandri Eisfra, who's a reward manager at Distel, and she asked, how do you keep your company culture alive if lots of people start working from home? Obviously, culture is often built in certain practices around and about the office. Mechell, do you have some insights in the culture question? Have you thought about, like, obviously, especially sort of medium to long term, how is this going to work?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and like for us at Unilever, we're very high on collaboration and relationships as a culture. So, I mean, you build strong relationships in the company. And from my sense, I think what's going to happen is people are going to want, even though they work from home, they're going to move more to hybrid solutions. So you're going to work from home, but you're going to want to come in to partner, to collaborate, because if you use the agile mindset, you're going to be at any one time working on multiple Scrum teams, for example. So you're going to want to come in and meet with your Scrum team, build that relationship, and then probably go and do some focused work. And for the focused work, you can do that at home. So I'm not too worried about an either or. I think people will find the moments of connection. And then, like Rachel says, although we are able to do town halls on a virtual way, a town hall is so effective when you can call people together, within a safe environment and just connect, because the town hall is more than the leader giving results or information. The town hall is an opportunity to engage, ask questions, have a good laugh about something, whatever. So I think you have to keep both going. I think there will be moments where as leaders, we will ask that our employees come together on something, strategy, cascades, anything like that. And there will be moments where we give focused time and work. And that rhythm has to be worked out by each company, what works based on the nature of your organization.
Do you have other ideas about culture, Rachel?
So we've managed to run a mini, we've got a culture survey that we run every 2 years, and we're quite concerned about how, most teams were coping without necessarily the typical connectivity that we're used to by being in the office. And when we picked up that a month or 2 months into the hard lockdown, there really was a sense of isolation, and a lot of our employees were starting to feel the emotional toll of being on their own. And when we took that mini dipstick survey, we were able to take that feedback and partner with our wellness providers such as ICAS and CAMF, and we put together a number of programs that we've rolled out to enable partners and our managers to make sure that they're able to maintain that connectivity with their employees. What we've also done is that we've also, I can't talk enough about technology. We've also made sure that from a learning perspective, we're able to run a number of our courses or programs virtually, and that enables people to also connect. And as we've moved through the different levels as well, what we've done is we've prioritized employees that prioritize giving preference to employees to return to work from an engagement perspective that typically cannot perform their functions from home, so that they also feel that they're not feeling left out. One thing we need to be cognizant of is that during this period, a number of institutions or organizations actually went through financial pressures, and most of us as HR directors were talking about retrenchments or laying off or downsizing. And so we needed to reassure our employees at Webber Wentzel that we will do, retrenchments or downsizing would be the last thing that we ever put on the table. And as another lever of assurance to our employees, we made sure that priority from an engagement perspective is given to those employees who struggle to work from home, who need that connectivity and that support. And usually it's our junior support employees or our junior fee earners, such as our candidate attorneys or our associates, because they really depend on being in the office, talking to their partners for work to be allocated to them. So we really have prioritized that. And as we've built our phased-in plans, we've made sure that we've accommodated these individuals, and we've ramped up by making sure that they are given preference. We are a family-centric business. I'm sure on this webinar there are people from law firms. Law firms by nature are quite family-centric, and people, that family culture is so important. And for us, it's important that we maintain that connectivity. So as much as we will find a balance between remote working and working from the office, a number of people that actually choose to work from Webber Wentzel join Webber Wentzel because they really want to feel they are part of the DNA of Webber Wentzel, and they just come into the office just to connect with their counterparts. So we are trying to find that balance to make sure that we don't deny people what it is that they joined Webber Wentzel for.
Richard, any thoughts on the culture aspect that we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah, I think the most important thing, well, one of the most important things is to make sure that the actions of the organisation are driven by the values. You can't just throw your values to the wayside because we're in a crisis. So, for instance, if I talk about my employer, Workday, so we have 6 values. The first value, the first and primary value, is taking care of our employees, because we believe that then we'll look after our customers and everything else flows from that. And I have to say, Workday has not deviated from that value at all. It's clearly been at the central. It's driven all the decisions. It's driving the decisions. So for me, that helps maintain that culture. The minute you set your values aside, that's when your culture starts breaking down. So yeah, that would be my comment, Joe. Yeah.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, and I think Rachel already touched on the mental aspect, and there were quite a lot of questions in the registration process about that. Obviously, you will have people in your workforce that have contracted COVID-19. Is there a stigma around it? There's employees that are maybe fearing their jobs, maybe not so much at your companies, but elsewhere. There's employees who have underlying conditions and are scared of contracting the virus, and just general heightened anxiety because of all the changes in society at the moment. How do you deal with the vulnerability of your workforce, and especially from the mental side? Maybe for Mechell.
Yeah, Joel, this is something that I think all HR professionals really need to take heed of, as well as all leaders in the business. I mean, mental illness has been on the rise year on year, and we see the statistics, and then we tend to go into the day-to-day job and just hope that it's going to come down on its own, and it's not going to come down on its own. I think whilst we'll see productivity go up, we'll see people becoming more agile. Let's not forget that adaptation and that change at the pace that it's happening, alongside lifestyle changes, alongside economic changes, social changes, is an immense amount of pressure that an individual has to go through. So what we focused on is saying, how do you build the resilience muscle for people to cope with changes not only that are coming from the organization, but changes in the family environment, in the social environment, in the context, so that you build your resilience overall as an individual. And we talk a lot about, investing the time and the space into physical wellness, into social wellness, and so forth, because that will help support your mental wellness. And why do I say that? Because a key factor in mental wellness is psychological safety. That I feel I'm being trusted and entrusted with the work that I'm doing. I don't have to fear failure. I don't have to fear, whether the company is going to, mark me down for anything that I do during this time. Because if there's a high sense of psychological safety, people can thrive in that environment. And the coaching work that we've got to do is with leaders to say, what is the big stuff you want to focus on and what can you drop? And, I often hear people saying, how does a leader know that their person is working and not from home, and not just, playing truant or doing other stuff personally? And I say, if that's your obsession, if you're coming from a point of distrust, you have to give trust. And as a leader, what you have to do is you have to be so clear about what your expectation of the individual is and what some support mechanisms go, with the belief that that person's going to thrive at whatever you give them. Because if you have that, you will never worry about the hours the person is working. You will worry about whether the person has met their true potential or not, and has given the goal. So for me, I think that's a key part and a key enabler to creating mental wellness in the workplace. But it has to be it has to remain a focus for us.
Rachel, is it a big ticket in your HR team as well?
Yeah, mental well-being has always been a big concern for us in the legal space, and only because fee earners do not know when to switch off. They work all the time. So, and it's been heightened at the moment by the sense of working from home. Like, as Mechell mentioned, there are no boundaries in terms of when you start work and when you end work. So, I've been very deliberate in the processes that I've rolled out to make sure that we are able to look after our, especially upcoming fee earners, where, they still open to being influenced and they really want to impress, but you can't impress at the expense of your own personal well-being. So one of the things from a policy perspective that we amended, and I go back to the question that was asked earlier around what some of the enhancements that we've done, is that because we know that there is no, people struggle with switching off. And in partnership, obviously, with our counterparts at Workday, all our data is on Workday. And what I've done is I've consciously got Exco to approve the number of leave days that employees are able to accrue in a given cycle. And because of that, we actually force employees to actually start taking annual leave. And we actually block you out of the system so that you're able to take time out to rest. And I know, and in our instance, there were a number of employees that actually wrote to us or asked HR for concessions, such as, I'm very busy working on an important matter and I can't take time off. But I always remind people that when you burn out, it's your health that suffers. So consciously, we've had to educate managers that you get the best out of your employees when they are well rested, they are the right space. So we've also had to adjust that. The other thing as well, we've also had to upskill and support our partners, is that we've stopped measuring inputs, as in if you're not seeing the person sitting at their desk, it means they're not working, and started focusing on measuring outputs. We have a value of excellence, and that value, I think it's ingrained in how people do things at Webber Wentzel, and therefore people are they struggled with trusting that things can be done remotely and someone can adjust and adopt their own work style to make sure that they are still able to meet the requirements. And how do you find that balance? And also taking into account the additional pressures that employees have, because working from home is not easy, because you've got children crying in the background, you've got there are people that are responsible for parents. So we've had to find that fine balance in supporting individuals to say, whenever you can deliver your work, that's the most important. So clarity in setting out expectations, clarity in contracting when deliverables are due, making sure that you are able to proactively engage your line manager or your partner to manage expectations when you can't meet something. And then also getting my HR team to check in, especially with the fee earners, from a wellness perspective, to check in if we feel that there's burnout, because you can track your productivity stats. So we track with billable hours, or we track billable billed hours, and you can be able to see that somebody is actually overworking themselves, and we're able to proactively reach out to them and actually say, you know what, we're really concerned about you. Is there something that we can do? Also, I'd like to share just a quick story. One of the teams that actually I felt personally went through a lot of pressure during this period was our IT team, because when COVID happened, all of a sudden they had to work 27 hours in a 24-hour day, just making sure that they supported the firm in making sure that we seamlessly transitioned into to enable everybody to work remotely. And we did not give them time to rest. And I had to consciously sit with our CIO to actually start slotting people on leave so that they could also take a break. So we do have a number of things that are top of mind in HR that we make sure that we continuously track.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, and I see there's a bit of a related discussion going on in the chat where Donald Kumalo from the JSC also asks, like, how are colleagues dealing with the ballooning leave provision? And I see Fiona, who works in the career space, is also saying people see taking leave while at home a little bit as wasting leave, like they're keeping it for some other time. So obviously Rachel was talking about forced leave. Have you got other smart solutions, Mechell?
Yeah, it's a hot topic in my organization at the moment. So I know exactly what everyone's putting comments on. It's really hard because people have become accustomed, especially in South African culture, right? You take leave and you go off somewhere in our beautiful country to another province or something, or you go overseas, and now you have to stay at home, and it does feel wasted. And we've been encouraging our employees to say, on the one hand, you see all the well-being stats, you hear cases where people are saying they're just starting to burn out and not concentrate anymore, in meetings. And so we've used the wellness angle. We've used some of the data points to say you really have to take time out for yourself. And then we started with some user stories. So we started asking leaders to share how they've spent their leave. So start leading by example. So actually booking off leave and going off the grid. It was funny. In one of our town halls, our CEO got feedback to say, Luca, we heard that you took leave, and then we saw emails being responded to. So, how are you leading for this? And that was a moment for us to say, actually, no one's going to believe that leave is important if leaders are on leave, but they've been responding to stuff. So, we asked our leaders to go on leave intermittently, and then to go off the grid, and then to come and talk about how that worked for them, what that leave did for them. And it was a really nice way to come back and say, this is what I did. And I really encourage you guys to do what fulfills you. And I was amazed when I went on leave, how I filled the day and got, my big example was I got so much of that financial admin out of the way. I renegotiated my Blue Security contract. I renegotiated, and I saved myself some money on one or two of the days, and then obviously got back into my running and stuff like that. But I think it's telling stories to say that this is really important and leading by example.
Thanks. Richard? When have you taken leave for the last time?
On the holidays? No, I took 3 weeks in August.
We're not worried about you.
Yeah. So I think at Workday, they've flexed the policy so that now you can carry across more days to next year. So but repeating or mirroring what everyone else is saying, I think we're trying to make sure people do take holiday. Because this whole going back to the well-being, the mental well-being, if you don't take holiday and you're just working 10, 12 hours a day, it's going to take a toll on anyone, I think. So, and one other thing, just on the well-being, what we've done at Workday for some areas of the business, we've said, right, because you can have a whole day of Zoom meetings or something, can't you, and it kills you. So on Fridays we've said, right, no meetings, so Fridays is the day when you can catch up, you can actually do your work. There'll be exceptions, but generally, no meetings on a Friday, and it's working really well. It gives people that buffer, takes the stress away, they can get their work done, and then on Monday, straight back into those Zoom meetings.
4 days for meetings and 1 day to do your work.
Exactly.
We're running towards 3 o'clock. So I just wanted to. There's a couple of practical questions as well that I think people are just waiting for answers. So one of them was like, what if people are telling you that they've been in touch with someone that contracted COVID-19 and now they need to work from home, but there's people get quite creative with using the situation for their own benefit. And that obviously talks to that trust situation that Mechell was talking about. So I suppose we all want to be trusting employers, but how do you sort of gauge when the trust is broken? Do you ask people for proof? Have you got something in place for that, Mechell, or can everything be solved with culture?
We didn't experience this at all. We didn't feel that there were, people coming forward saying they had COVID. So I didn't have that experience, but what we also did was we have an app, a daily app that we kicked off, soon into the COVID crisis, where employees could tell us how they were feeling based on the typical symptoms of COVID. So every day we encourage employees to go into the app and tell us where they were on the scale of a fever, or how they were feeling overall and so forth. And so and that would go straight to our occupational health team. And they were so proactive. So the occupational health team was so proactive that if you said, yes to any one of those, you would get a call and you would get a follow-up and so forth. And so I imagine that would be a deterrent, that like if you're just trying to get some time off and you're really winging it, you're not really ill and whatever, that the support that you would be taking away from the OH team when they could be using that support in real cases, must feel really hard to do. So nobody misused the support that was given. I didn't have that. I should hope that that's not the case in your organization. I think trust people. I wouldn't go digging for proof or anything during this time. I think, remember, there's a recovery phase after all of this, where you've got to hold your organization's culture. It's always the select few who will try to find the loopholes. It's not the majority of your people. So I think give trust openly, and of course, for blatant disregard of your rules, deal with it with your disciplinary actions. But I think it's a time to also be, heartwarming and overlook some of those things that may not be real in the end, may not be so big in the end.
Thanks, Mechell. That's wonderful. And then Rachel, maybe a last question from Teboho in the chat, asking, what if people want to work from home, but your organization really wants them to work from the office for some or the other reason? You've told me that, for example, at Webber Wentzel, certain documents can never leave the building, so those people will have to come to the office. And people may find they have very strong reasons that they should be working from home. How do you deal with that?
So, as I've said, I mean, there are certain exceptional circumstances where we can't allow information to leave the building, and we don't stop you from working from home. In fact, up until level 3 was announced, we encouraged everybody to work from home. But what we do is, you can come into the office just for a specific. Let's say you want to prepare for a matter that's going to court, or you're preparing for an arbitration, then you come in specifically for that. And what we've also done is that we've allowed flexibility in terms of starting times, ending times, when you are in the office and when you leave the office. So we used to start, our starting times pre-COVID was 7:45, and we finished at 4:45. And now our starting times are from 7:30 until 10 o'clock. And finishing times are also from 3 o'clock until 6 o'clock. So you can flex yourself to come in as and when you need. And then we also, I'd like to echo what Mechell just spoke about. I mean, trust is at the center of what we do. We expect you to exercise caution in terms of protecting client data. As much as possible, we don't stop you from working from home. But if there's a need that you come into the office, even if it is just for an hour or two, we then expect you to do that. We've also made sure that you own your own work experience. Just as I said, we're more interested in measuring output rather than input. Where you actually work from at the moment is we're no longer fixated on where it is that you work from.
Thanks very much, and thanks to the panelists. Rachel, I quickly asked your question in the poll when we were preparing. Rachel was telling me, I don't know what the policy should be in terms of wearing a mask during meetings. So I quickly put a poll, and if you haven't voted yet, please let us know. I'll end the poll now, so you can see the results in the chat. And 0% says, so the question is, are you wearing a mask during meetings? And 0% says never. 11% says, in my company, wearing a mask and social distancing are individual decision. 22% says only speakers are allowed to take their mask off while it's their turn. and 66%, so 2/3, says they're wearing a mask all the time in their organization. So, Richard, I think that's going to be a bit different in the UK, maybe, because I think the South Africans are pretty good with their masks, or is it the same by now?
Mixed, I think.
Mixed, yeah, exactly. Richard, Rachel, and Mechell, thank you very much. I think the insights were extremely valuable already from the responses in the chat. I can see so, but I also found it a fantastic discussion to be part of. So, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to put this one up. We all know we've been in this one. I just wanted to ask you for some attention for this particular event, and let me. Boom, now we're all at the bottom. So you can see that you can sign up at hrindaba.co.za for fantastic world-class gamified HR conference. Most of you here will know the HR Indaba. It's really going to be fantastic. I'm super excited. So please sign up. If you don't like it after 2 hours, then you may leave. But I very much doubt it. It's going to be fantastic. So thanks everyone for joining, for the interaction up front and in the chat, and hope to see you all soon in one of our webinars or on the 14th of October.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone. Bye bye.
Bye bye.